Welcome to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good, and we love having speakers and authors come on the show sharing their expertise. And that's why we're honored to have with us Hannah Ubel and Lisa Walden, co-founders of Good Company Consulting and authors of the book, The Future of Work is Human, Transforming Company Culture for a Post-Pandemic World. How are you two doing?
Fantastic. So well.
So awesome. Thanks for having us on, Jeremy.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of good to discuss, but let's start with a little bit of your background in terms of how you two met and came together. Let's start there, and then we'll dive into all the good you do with Good Company Consulting.
Yeah, that's a fun place to start because Hannah and I we met in college in theater. We were both members of the Shakespeare Society, which is very nerdy. And we actually directed a show together. So that was the first time that we really partnered in something. And then, went our separate ways after college, dabbled in a few different jobs. Then Hannah got a role at a generational consulting firm. And long story short, I ended up there as well. Loved the theme of generational differences in the workplace, how that affects how we show up, how we interact with one another, even just on a personal front. And the next move after that, pre-pandemic, so that was an auspicious time to step into the speaking world on our own. We did together. We started Good Company Consulting, because we'd sort of seen that a common thread among the interviews and research we conducted at the generational consulting firm was that people just hated their jobs. They hated their work. We loved ours. And they would often ask us, how did you get to where you are? How do I get a job that I love as well? And certainly the work that we were doing was incredible, but also the structure of the company we were at was amazing too. So we wanted to step back and think, why do people hate their jobs so much? And what can we do? What information can we share that we have learned on our journeys to help people build these more wonderful, less, as we call it, sucky workplaces and places that people love to be at instead. So that is the journey of how Hannah and I met and started GCC together.
So Hannah, what would you add when you talk about Good Company Consulting, and especially for you two as speakers, what would you add to that in terms of focus, content, and obviously impact?
Our goal, I will say, is always to relate to people. I mean, that's the biggest thing. You talk to any single person and they're like, yeah, work kind of sucks sometimes. Like, that's just kind of the natural feeling that most people have. It's not a uncommon occurrence for people to not enjoy work. So our goal is to just relate to everyone in every single kind of room that we're in and any conversation that we have. So I would say that, and probably as you'll hear in this conversation with Lisa and myself, is that we try to be as relatable as possible. So we think often in the business expert or consulting or speaking world, it can kind of feel like speaking at people and coming from this place of like, well, I'm the expert. And we are very much not that way. We're like, we've lived it. We are working now. We understand. Let's meet you where you are at and try to help you really see how you can contribute to a people-first work environment where people can enjoy work a little bit more. Because our belief is really that every single person contributes something to the work environment that they're in. Some people have more responsibility than others. They have a bigger sphere of influence. But no matter who you are, we're like, there's something we can all do to make work a little bit better. So that's one of those pieces I would add, is just that relatability, meeting people where they're at.
So this will lead us into the book, but where do you like to start when you're stepping into the world of a company and assessing where they're at in that moment with their culture? There is a piece of this, like you said, you're focused on the human element, but at the same time, there's all the data elements as well. And so where do you like to start to get a pulse of where they are today and then where you're going to take them tomorrow? So where do you like to start?
I think that we might start from a variety of different places, but we have very deep conversations with our clients to understand where they're at. So sometimes it's just asking, why are you bringing us into your organization? Like, what about us appealed to where you are at? And then a couple other questions, and I'm sure Lisa will have many more to add to this as well. But there's the question of, what are your current challenges? What are you currently facing? And then describe your culture. That's one of the most important ones, because that gives us a really good understanding and a gauge for where they're at just based on how people answer that question. But those are some of the things. But Lisa, I know you have other thoughts too, so please add.
I would say the one-on-one interviews and conversations that we have with people within an organization, those are gold in terms of leading us to what's actually going on. And we are very specific about, we want those to be one-on-one. We tell the people we're speaking to that the conversations are candid, and they just help us understand where are the areas, the challenging areas, the areas of opportunity in this organization that we can speak to directly. And we do that with every engagement. Is we try to get at very least a handful of people that we can connect to and have those interviews with. And when they're most valuable is when we're able to speak to representatives of different layers within the hierarchy in the organization. So, if we're just speaking to leaders, we'll often get one perspective. And as we all know, that perspective does not necessarily match the real lived experience of their direct reports and, non-managerial staff. So having that full perspective helps us. I mean, we've seen this chasm just continue to grow over the pandemic, from everything from return to office to, are you actually doing work when you are doing your job remotely, to, how should leaders show up, all kinds of things. There's been a growing kind of gap. And our hope is we want to be able to try and bridge that for people in terms of generating understanding, trying to come at the chasm, not from a place of, this person is right. Or, even one thing that we hear a lot is, obviously generations is still a part of what we do. And, people are saying, leaders are saying Gen Z has no work ethic. Nobody wants to work these days. All of this is tied to what we experienced in the pandemic. And so we try to bridge that gap of understanding and show, hey, this is where this comes from. We understand it might look frustrating to either faction, but here's some information that might help relieve some of that frustration, understanding the why of where this comes from. And then here's what you can do about it, because it doesn't have to be this way. There doesn't have to be this chasm. So by a better understanding one another, this is how we move forward into a better organization, a better work world. So it's truly those moments of one-on-one conversation that are game-changing in the work that we do. And it's incredible because we'll talk to people, and more times than I'm surprised it's happened this many times. We've had people say to us, who do I write the therapy check to? Because they're just so grateful for those conversations, and especially leaders who don't really often have the chance to be heard. So it kind of it goes two ways in the sense that we're able to do great research, but also be there and be present and listen to people as they share, the challenges that they've experienced in the workplace. So it's a really great kind of approach, I would say.
So understanding the challenges, seeing the opportunities, and as you mentioned, having the toolkit for solutions, that's all a big part of this book. And so once again, the book is The Future of Work is Human, Transforming Company Culture for a Post-Pandemic World. What led you to write this book?
So this was a book that we were writing before what we call the pandemic years. We had all these ideas of how the workplace could change for the better. And we had this ebook that we were writing. And then, of course, 2020 and the pandemic years, as we call them, happened. And everyone saw there was a huge transformation of how people were looking at work. There's different expectations of what they needed and wanted from leaders. Leaders, of course, were struggling and trying to figure out, how do we keep our company afloat, make people happy, still recruit people? Like, it was challenge upon challenge upon challenge. And so many organizations and people we spoke to were just trying to get through it. And as people are now, we're kind of getting through it. It's like, whoa, there are so many lessons we learned in the past few years about how work needs to change in order to engage the current workforce. And because so many people who are out there working shifted their mindsets about how work fits in their lives and what they want from leaders, we kind of took all of that information we had written and believed and researched before all of this happened, and then applied it to all of the lessons and all the conversations that we had during the past few years. We took a couple of years to really write this book. And then we're like, cool, let's help people create this greater work environment, taking all of those lessons that we learned in the past few years to create these great workplaces. And so that was really the motivation behind the book. And we wanted to put something together that every single person could see themselves in. So this book is very much written for leaders. It is written for people who are not leaders. Like, it's written for any single person who is at work and wants to learn more about burnout, perfectionism, communication, leadership, connection at work. Like, we just wanted it to be a tool for people to take to create a different future of work.
Lisa, touch on taking the themes that Hannah just mentioned, burnout, communication. Give us one, and you can take it among any of the different themes, but give us one of your tips when you look at the first one that kind of pops into your head around these important topics and themes. Give us one that stands out to you as an important tip from the book.
I would say a running theme throughout all of our chapters, everything that we touch on is the idea of compassion and empathy for one another and putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. So, we have a chapter on compassionate leadership, which is how do we show up as compassionate leaders, and starts with the compassion needs to be extended first and foremost to yourself, because that's something that we see a lot in our work, which is it's a great thing in some senses that, we talk to a lot of leaders who are trying to care for their staff so much that they neglect the fact that they too are human beings and they too can only take so much. So that compassion and empathetic thread runs through everything that we're talking about. And it applies in so many different contexts. In communication, for example, to answer your question, there is this sense that, people know how to communicate at work. So we tick that off. If you filled out, the form, if you sent in a resume, if you said words in your interview, you are a communicator, you're good. And there's no intentionality and thought behind, okay, maybe we need to spend a little bit of time, because communication is an art. It's a challenging thing. There's a lot of different things that go into communicating effectively. And primarily in our minds is empathy for the person you're communicating with. And when we add all of the layers of complication, the fact that we're working from home, that some people are working in hybrid settings, even if you're not in the office, you have Slack, you have Teams, you have people are texting. We heard from a client who said that they're getting Snapchats from their Gen Z staff. I'm not even kidding. And one client said they created like a I'm not on Snapchat, so I don't know, but they said they created like a Snapchat room to talk to a handful of their employees. So it's a lot. There's a lot of different things going on. We're getting pinged from all directions. And so often what we default to is you're just saying what you wanted to say, right? You had a thought in your mind, you communicated, you wrote it down, however you sent it, that's it. What's in your mind, you put it down and you send it along. But that is, 20 to 30% of the work, because you really need to think about how is this message being received by the receiver? If I read it with different eyes, if I didn't have the context that I have, will I understand this message? Is it going to be effective when the other person takes a look at it? And, obviously super important, it also is the intent versus the impact. Sometimes we have an intent of a message that we're sending, but the impact hits very differently. So how can we take a step back and outside of our bodies to try and understand from an empathetic, compassionate standpoint, how is this message going to be received? How can I truly write it in a way that's not just going to make sense to me, but is going to make sense to the receiver? So that compassionate thread really weaves its way through everything that we talk about in the book.
It's interesting just from a communication standpoint. I'm thinking we have conversations around, even with our team, where it's like just hey, if I send a message, at least just say, got it, because sometimes with IT issues, you never know if that email actually goes through. So there's a mental checkoff. And so It's reframing even how we, obviously the methods with the different apps and things like that, the technology piece, but really just the basics around what's your preferred style so that everyone is on the same page and feels like they're getting what they need to be successful. So it's interesting that, the communication, just, getting everybody on the same page and understanding, like you said, the context and the intent. Hannah, what would you add is something that was a little bit of an aha moment? When you talk about writing a book and going through and doing the deep dive, and like you said, taking the time to analyze things and put thoughts behind it, what was something that either reframed, what it looks like on your end, or an aha moment, or something that you said, wow, I'd never thought of it this way. This is really insightful and this is helping me. So what was something that came about through this process?
Oh, what a question. I mean, I will say just first and foremost, aside from the content of the book, writing a book just teaches you a lot. There were many, many lessons. And, one thing I think that's very funny, we have an entire chapter on perfectionism. And Lisa and I would say, are high achievers. Okay. So like we have high standards for ourselves and for a lot of, just the people we work with, the vendors we work with, and we're surrounded by amazing vendors and amazing people. But it was very funny to be in this process of writing a book and, writing and editing a chapter about perfectionism, which of course went through, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 different versions of a chapter. And so we're reading these pieces about how perfectionism shows up at work. And where does perfectionism comes from? It comes from yourself, it comes from your upbringing, and it comes from, your colleagues. And then of course it comes from society. And so there's a lot of research that backs that, that's in the book. And it was funny because we were editing and editing and editing and overthinking sentence after sentence after sentence. And then it was kind of like, oh, this is so weird. We have tips within this chapter about how to help yourself with perfectionism. And it's like, oh, things can't be perfect. And we are fallible, vulnerable humans. And this book will go out into the world. And you know what? It's not going to be perfect because that doesn't exist. So it was this really beautiful moment of applying the lessons within the chapter itself, because there's advice in there too about, hey, you made a mistake and something happens and you realize you would have done things differently. How do you have a conversation about it? How do you learn from it? How do you celebrate it so that you can keep innovating and creating? And so I would say that was one of the funniest aha moments, honestly, as we were going through this, is like, okay, should we edit it again? Do we need to get another editor? We should probably have more eyes on this chapter. And there's a point of like, you know what? I bet it's good. I bet we've reached the point that done is better than perfect, as Sheryl Sandberg says. And we really learned that and applied that. So I would say that was one of the biggest aha moments. Is it's really easy to kind of think about these things conceptually, but then when you're like, myself, I mean, those standards for me are obviously not things I can flex for, which is just not true. So it was a very lovely little lesson.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty epic one right there. 2 perfectionists writing a perfectionism.
Recovering perfectionist, Jeremy. Recovering perfectionist, okay?
Hey, I can totally relate to all this, so 100%. So we could have this conversation, obviously go on for hours, but let's go ahead and wrap up with where we go to carry this conversation forward. So talk about where we can get the book, talk about where we can follow you online. Where do we go?
Yeah, the book's available on Amazon. So, good old www.amazon.com, as everyone knows. And then in terms of where we're at, both Hannah and I have a pretty active presence on LinkedIn individually. We have a good company consulting page. And on Instagram, we're pretty active as well. So that's at Good Company Consulting. And those are the best places to come find us. We're really active in the conversation around workplace. I think one of the interesting things about the way we do our work is we also look at the conversation online. So we use TikTok, Instagram, social media, LinkedIn as a way to get our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world of work. So it's a really fun, robust conversation that we have on our social spaces.
Love it. Once again, Good Company Consulting. The book is The Future of Work is Human, Transforming Company Culture for a Post-Pandemic World. Hannah Ubel, Lisa Walden, thank you for all you do. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us, Jeremy.